Hey everybody, happy Saturday, and we're almost on time, but look, I think everything's set up right. Can you guys talk?
We are almost set up right. You've still got the green screen, well, pink screening on our cameras though, so I look all washed out, and so does Suda.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that from here. Hold on. Can I do it?
We went and got fancy lighting so that we would look better,
and then I killed it all.
Screening.
Party mode. Woo.
Party mode.
There we go. There's one less for Pseudo.
All the RGB on your new machine. Just turn it on max.
No, the ring light I have, it has RGB. So
Oh really?
it has a party mode, so I could just.
Did you get the same one that I did? Do I have party mode?
Maybe it is newer, but it's the. I think they had one that didn't have a stand, and that one was just RGB. So I'm not too sure. I'm not sure if it's just the bicolor or not, but.
Looks like you've got a different one than I do, unfortunately. I want party mode now.
Anyway, our name's right, the screen's right, look at all that, the titles are all there, it's already shared, people can already get to it, the bot will spam at any moment, but if you guys want to follow along right from the beginning, that's the wrong place to put it. There you go. Hey Saxo, hey Board, hey Lurkers, how's everyone doing this Saturday? Rage, Pseudo, how you guys?
I don't know about you, but I'm doing pretty great because GDQ is on.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to watch much of it. I've been kind of crazy busy today, other than waking up early in the morning and doing a bunch of Sushi Ghost. Went and killed some Mongols.
I was enjoying the Yakuza 6 run. That is it's always fun to just bring houseplants wherever you go.
Those Yakuza games are such amazing games, and they are so not for me. Just on so many levels.
I thoroughly enjoyed Zero. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Just a well-built game all around. Oh
yeah.
But so
absolutely.
To start, do we have any news? Is there any news that needs to be covered? Game related? Avoiding the rest of news?
Avoiding all of the nonsense that's been going on.
Yes, let's not talk about nonsense. Let's talk about games. Nonsensical games at most.
Video games. I mean, in a little bit of personal news, I just picked up the Switch collection of all the Super Mario 3D games.
Ooh, what happened there?
You faded away.
I faded?
Now you're back. Away. You're good. Now you're good. It's just that one. I don't know. Did you lean back as you said it? Did you get too excited?
I probably went lean back with excitement and just got a little too far away from the microphone and didn't speak any louder.
That happens. Okay. Well, I don't think there's really much in the world of gaming news that was impressive. So let's start with Q&A, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people in chat haven't done speedrunning before. You've probably seen speedrunning and been like, how did that happen? Because that's
a very common occurrence.
That sums up speedrunning usually. So we're going to be talking about how that happened. Not just the tricks they use, but why those tricks work. Funny things. Do we have any questions to start with? Has anybody seen something that they want explained?
If not, we do have some topics.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started and just leave it as an open QA, all right? You have questions, just hit them. This is an open QA. We will take them anytime they come up. If it just pops into your head randomly, oh shit, how do you do this? Or why did that happen? Hit us. The best games you have played for speedrunning. I don't speedrun.
There is precisely one game that I got into speedrunning, and it was Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. I did the 100% route because I really love that game, and it had the least silly out of bouncing. Yeah, super fun. Just really tight combat.
Yep. I like figuring out my games, and once I understand the game and know what's happening in the game, then I tend to lose interest pretty quickly. I can't just like grind out a game over and over and over and over again. When I'm doing it, I'm just like, but I could be playing this game and learning things. Even if I'm not learning anything super useful, I'm still like, using my brain and figuring things out and learning. And that's just my approach to games. I'm not saying that's the way to game. That's my way to game. Everyone's got their own way. And I love what some speedrunners do. I understand what happens in the speedruns. I watch them time to time and go, oh, look, they ruined my favorite game.
much like the Sekiro speedrun that is going to be starting very shortly.
Yep. The Sekiro speedrun completely ruined my favorite game. And of course there is, glitchless categories, and maybe that's what we should start with. Most people, or a lot of people, don't realize that not all speedruns are, look, I jumped through the world and landed on the boss and glitched him through the floor and I win! That's not every category. You're not allowed to do that in some. There's some that we have, the most populars are any percent. You see a lot of any percent, and that's basically just make the credits roll. It's all you have to do. One of my favorite and one of the most famous ones for that is a memory address edit bug in Super Mario World that was previously only able to be done by tasks where they do very specific pixel perfect movements that causes the memory to line up in such a way in Super Mario World that the game just goes, oh, and rolls the credits at the end. It's in one of the first levels. It's absolutely ridiculous, and somebody actually pulled it off by hand. We're talking pixel perfect movements and jumps and dropping shells and yeah, absolutely insane. It was super boring to watch, and if you watched it, you're just like, whatever. He just went to the first level and threw a shell around a little bit.
But the fact that could be done is amazing.
RE7 is a surprisingly straightforward speed run.
Yeah, that's actually a really well-made game. There's not a ton of stuff that you can do to break it.
Which is funny because the speedrun on 2 Remake on the same engine is not.
Super broken.
Speedrunners are like, hey, you want a speedrun with not on lowest settings with a high-end computer? No.
I need all of those frames for the knife glitch. Interestingly, there are some categories that are specific to game engines that operate off the frame timer rather than Delta T and a fixed clock. Because if you're calculating, say, in this case, damage, every time a new frame is rendered, then you want as many frames as possible while your attack is active. Which is more or less how the knife glitch works in what was it, RE2?
Yeah.
The knife glitch is in, yeah. Because your attack has active frames, so for every frame that attack is active, it ticks damage. So you want more frames, so then you can just like knife something 3 times and it explodes. Yeah,
that's why the first boss in RE2 Remake for the speedrun, they run up to it with a knife, crouch, and just go and it dies.
Which would be normally very minimal damage.
Yeah, kind of ridiculous. So what they're doing is they're pushing up, 200-300 frame range, put everything on minimum, very fewest settings you can have, and just let the game run, and then you get all those frames of damage as you're sliding through. So if you're running at 100 FPS, which is higher than a lot of people, they're actually doing about 3 times more damage than you.
It's very silly. Which is another interesting thing about that run, which is why that there are different frame tiers for speed runs. Like you would cap at 100 FPS for one run, cap at 150 FPS for another run, cap at 300 FPS for another run, and it's all down to the knife glitch.
Yeah, so we won't set up those categories because they're fairly game specific. I'm trying to stick to you'll probably see these categories, at least these first 3 that I've put down, you'll see them in pretty much every game that's speedrun. They're fairly universal.
There's always the fun blindfolded runs as well. That's always a real fun category to watch.
Is that even a
I don't know
speed
if
run
you
at
guys
that
caught
time?
it. I don't know if you guys caught it, but there was a blindfolded 16-star Mario 64 run at GDQ, and it was amazing.
That was just like amazing to watch that. Like, that is just absolutely nuts. Or like,
I've been watching someone do a glitchless speedrun of Dead Space recently. The only thing that sucks about it is you're kind of at the mercy of RNG ammo drops and a lot of unavoidable room lockdown enemy encounters. Yeah, for sure. That's a big problem with a lot of speedruns, just like Dea said, is you don't have a reliable source of resources. You just have to get lucky.
Yeah. Actually, that's on a lot of the old JRPGs and stuff like that, like the SNES era JRPGs, up to even Final Fantasy VII, where you see people speed running them, and they have very specific routes that don't always look like the most direct route through a level. They do some weird things sometimes, especially at the start of the game. They're doing weird things before they start the game. That's actually seeding the RNG. They're creating the entropy on the system that the system is using to create the RNG in order to create very reliable seeds so they know what is going to randomly happen before it happens. We'll talk more about entropy manipulation later. Yeah. Entropy manipulation gets really, really interesting, and that's how they do it. Like, you'll see some Diablo 2 speedruns use entropy manipulation where they can reliably go into a floor, or Diablo 1 as well, go into a door, and then there's the door right there, and just doop, doop, doop. That was planned. They planned their randomness, which is...
Yeah. Very, very cool.
That's
my favorite is the my favorite is the Diablo 1 speedrun, which I beat. I think you beat at like level 10 or something, in about 3 minutes.
It can be done. It can be done. And you'll get a lot of people that don't do speedrunning watching it going, that's impossible. It's just highly unlikely, but they know how to force it.
TAS is another good speedrunning category.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite to watch, especially, I can't remember, the Brain Age one, I can't remember when this was done, but that was absolutely amazing. Just the drawings it would do, and then still get the inputs, and it just gets hilarious. Or just in general, that's the TAS is watching what can be pulled off with just frame and pixel perfect timing.
Yeah. So one of the most famous examples of TAS that a lot of people heard of was the Super Mario 1 speedruns, where there's actually a rapid acceleration thing that they can do, and you'll see the person jump and turn backwards and land and then take off at full speed almost instantly. Now what's happening is they're pushing left and right on the D-pad at the same time. Now why that's tool assisted is because the NES can't do that.
Yeah,
the actual D-pad
cannot do that with the controller.
Yeah, it won't take two inputs off the D-pad at the same time, so it had to be tool assisted. If you ever see somebody doing that, they're not doing it by themselves. Period. But that's one of the examples of it. Doing things, multiple inputs or superhuman speed inputs is another example of TAS where they use it. I don't have a game on the tip of my tongue where they use rapid input with TAS. But it's why it's there.
One of the really cool things about TAS, though, is to see what's possible within the confines of a game. And once you know what's possible, you can then try and replicate that as a human rather than a script, which is where it gets really, really cool.
Like the kill screens in Tetris that people thought weren't actually possible by humans. And then I should really know the names, but I think it was recently we made it to a kill screen that we thought was only possible through TAS.
Right on.
Yep.
You're talking about like the Grandmaster level Tetris runs? Kind
of. It's for NES Tetris, I believe. It gets to a point where like the inputs have to be so precise that we didn't think that we humans could be able to do it, or just like the physical limitations of the controllers themselves can actually push it to the point where you get to the kill screen and the game will just start glitching out because there's nothing more you can get to. But it's nuts, and we wouldn't know it was possible. We wouldn't know that even existed if it wasn't for TAS runs. And then it's cool that people see that and like, maybe we can. Let's just keep trying.
See, I was thinking of when you were saying kill screen, when they like past the game over screen, when you complete the game and you still have to complete like another 10 lines with invisible bricks and the screen left as it was.
Yeah, those ones are just...
I've seen a few just like, you're not human Tetris runs. And if you haven't seen that, I strongly recommend looking up Grandmaster Tetris runs. I mean, you'll get a little flash of the brick in the top middle for like, here's the shape you have, and then it disappears. And you have to control it and put it on the screen. And what you're working with is the junk that was left over when you finished your game. It goes invisible, but is still there. And you have to get 10 lines with invisible bricks on your old junk. Apparently, people can do this. Apparently.
This is a thing that can be done. I can't do it. But it is a thing that can be done.
So do we have any other major categories we want to list down? These are like the major ones.
Yeah, these are most of the major categories, but I would like to say that you can combine like any percent, low percent, 100% with a TAS or with a glitchless run in order to get different combinations of categories.
Yeah. So you can do like an any percent glitchless where you're not allowed to glitch the game. You just got to get through it as fast as you can. 100% glitchless where you have to do the whole game, everything in it, 100% complete without glitching the game. Purposely, I guess. What happens if you accidentally glitch? I guess you're kind of screwed then. You're starting your run over.
Yeah. And then you reset.
It's like there's also the deathless and the no hits, which I kind of challenge runs as well.
Yep. Yeah. Challenge. Yeah. Let's add little challenge runs such as deathless and no hit. Yeah, I think they fall into a completely different category than speedrunning, but we'll mention them here anyway. For an example of I don't like watching speedruns, as I said, but I love watching glitchless runs, and the Doom Eternal 100% glitchless speedrun is so satisfying to watch. That is art in motion. And the reason I like them is because those test your game skills. Any percent is testing your break skills. How well can you break this game? Low percent item runs.
A bit of both. I mean, it's a lot of skill that still needs to be in the game part of things. That the any percents and the glitch runs are just like, let's see what this homebrew QA team can find, and it is just hilarious and amazing, especially when you get things like input buffering.
Yep.
When you pause the screen, put in a bunch of input buffer, and then all of a sudden you're like, where did I go? The game took all my input in like a couple frames and executed it, and now we have teleported.
Yep, that would be the Doom Eternal any percent run.
Yeah, and just on another note of another category, because Board brought it up, there is also another category called low percent, where you specifically go for the least amount of game completion required, but it's not possible on every game.
Progress?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I've watched too much low percent.
They are fairly rare.
Yeah.
They can.
I wonder what a low percent glitchless run would look like. Of like a JRPG or something. That would be nuts.
Yeah. I'm pretty good at combat in those games, but yeah. I mean, as good as I am in combat in those games, there comes a point where it's just numbers. As we saw in my Chrono Trigger run, I smashed the whole game. I got to Lavos, and then it killed me in one hit. There's nothing I can do about that. It did one attack and everyone died. There's nothing you can do to prevent this except go get more levels. Otherwise, that was a pretty quick run for a casual run.
Yeah, Chrono Trigger is a great game. Great run.
It is. I love that game. I thought you were just going to say great game, but yeah, great game, great run, great everything. I don't like speedrunning JRPGs though. It's meant to be like a beloved story, not a look, I'm done. That's okay.
Yeah.
They're fine.
I think it's kind of neat.
They can be kind of neat. I just don't like them. I don't like them. Not bad. I just don't like them. But I don't like speedruns in general. Okay. So, I don't see any proper questions. We've got the topics, the major categories down. What do you want to start with? Out of bouncing?
Sure. That's we could start with out of bounding, or we could go like how to beat a game fast.
Don't stop.
Don't stop for any reason. Build right. But like there are some fundamentals to beating video games quickly. And those fundamentals are generally to boost your damage as much as possible, to optimize your movement, to not waste any unnecessary time, e.g. don't go for an extra damage boosting item that you don't actually need. Don't, route too many items into your run.
Yep. Rule number 1 of getting the fastest run possible, work with the community. Speedruns are not a single person job, ever. The person who put up that world record time did not do it by himself. You just saw him sitting there. He had a whole community of people at his back helping him find holes in walls that shouldn't exist, shortcuts, bugs through areas. It's all about having... Remember, every once in a while I bring up the fact that there's a hard mathematical equation that can be done that will find how many bugs in your software compared to how many eyes are looking at it. The same thing as with speedrunning. The bigger the community doing the speedrun, the more shortcuts are found and the quicker you can go. Gotta work with your community.
Yeah, even the Yakuza 6 run that they were just doing, there was a boss they were fighting, and they said that it's figured this out like a month or so before. It's one of my favorite things about the speedrunning community, that everyone's just so excited when they find, that next kind of boost, the next, hey, I can shave off, even if it's like a couple seconds, that really adds up over, like a couple hour long game. Yep. And they're still finding things, and it's exciting, especially if you're someone who can find the new thing and say, hey, post the community, look, I found that if you do this, I can reduce the timing down. One they were bringing up that they just found recently, like a month, is before the boss fight, you can grab the house plant that's beside right where you started, and then when you load the boss fight next after the cutscene, you're still holding the item, and you attack, and you basically like almost one shot him, and then you can throw it and kill him in basically 2 hits. And it just like it's an amazing boost, and it's something you don't always think about. A lot of people will do these runs, and eventually someone's like, what if I try to take this with me? And all of a sudden, that's the new way to do it. And I just find like it's my favorite part about like speedrunning in the community, just everyone coming together, because everyone just wants that time to go down, not necessarily be the one to do it, but everyone's working together to see how fast these games can be completed.
In other words, what you're saying is Yakuza has its own death by chicken?
Yes.
Basically, yeah.
Death by common houseplant and chairs. Common furniture.
When I as somebody who does not play the Yakuza games, when I was watching specifically the Yakuza 6 speedrun at GDQ this year, I messaged into our Yakuza channel on the Discord and said, is there something I missed here, or is this just how Yakuza combat works? Like, just grab a chair and win.
Items are
Items are super OP, yeah. If you have an item in your hand, you just hit a button and annihilate someone. That is totally how Yakuza combat works. Nothing glitchy about that. The only glitch is they shouldn't have been able to have that in the boss fight.
I would have loved it if the cutscenes were pre-rendered, and for some reason during the cutscene, Kiryu was still holding the plant. Just walk into the bathhouse like, hey. I got your plant.
So the first strategy for like actual implemented strategy I wanted to talk about, I think we can start with damage boosting, because it's actually a strategy that people can learn to help them through lots of retro games and stuff. It genuinely helps you complete the games, period. And damage boosting combines a couple factors. It uses the abuse of iframe damage, cannot be damaged at this time, and knockback when hit, normally used to stop you from being chained to death by enemies. You'll see this a lot in games that don't have iframes or don't have knockback. If you get hit and the enemy hits you again, they can just keep hitting you before you have control of your character and die. And that's horrible gameplay. Horrible gameplay. Hey, look, I had no control over my death. Yay. That's not fun for anybody. So what they do is when you get hit, you go into this animation of, oh, I've taken damage, and they make you flash, and anything that hits you can't hurt you, and it bounces you back a little bit, so you're not just sitting in the attack, and you have time to regroup and reapproach. So we've got damage immunity and forced movement. I think we can do something with this. Go ahead, Rage. I see you nodding. You're frothing there, I'm sure.
I absolutely am. So the way that you can use these two properties, the fact that A, you cannot take damage, and B, there is forced movement to your character, is by abusing the fact that that forced movement will generally have a direction. And at least early on in the history of video games, that movement will just be backwards.
We're talking Castlevania, Ninja Gaiden, like we're talking the NES classics that people are like, that game's hard.
Oh yeah, and they are. They're very difficult video games. But you will be knocked backwards, and I say specifically backwards, not away from the enemy. Key distinction there. So what you do is you're running up to the enemy schmucks you, and you just turn around on that same frame, and because you are A, invulnerable, and B, having forced movement applied to you, you get knocked through the enemy rather than away from the enemy back towards the direction that you came from. So it's one of the earliest instances of speedrunning tech is using damage dealt to you, the player, because health is a resource just like everything else. You take damage intentionally to move faster across the screen or move through an enemy that you otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, this is also used in I think in the Ninja Gaiden run, there's a couple points where you've got to go through this little, you got to go down and do a whole bunch of platforming and work your way back up because the gap's a little too big for you. And what they do is they jump over the gap and they switch around backwards, and the enemy hits them and they damage boost backwards and they clear the gap. Winning. Those hits you see them take in the damage run, they're usually doing it on purpose for this reason. They're either going to take a small hit to move through something that would otherwise kill them without taking damage, or they're going to use that movement to push them over the gap. And how much more do you want to go on damage boost? I'm sure you have a little bit more, because we can actually waylay damage boosting into out of bounds stuff, because that's also how it's used.
Yeah, we could go into out of bounds. I just want to keep at the front of our minds to tackle things like builds and routing as well. So let's go into out of bounds now, and then let's talk about routing and building.
Sure. So the out of bounds, how I said we can waylay into it, that's another thing that damage boosting is actually used for. It's out of bounds thing. So we've got this forced movement. Now, a lot of times in the code, that forced movement doesn't check for a wall when it moves you. That's not a wall, that's air.
And this is specifically because it's not technically forced movement in the earliest implementations. It's just a canned animation that plays when you get hit.
Which happens to relocate your character. It just
Yeah.
doesn't check if there happens to be anything else there. This is, of course, the early games. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar. Another popular out of bounds would be Mega Man 2, Castlevania. They use it a lot. Super Mario uses it a lot by phasing into a roof. By going short and then tall, you'll see him take the same spot as the sprite, and then he'll just walk through wall as though it's not there. Hey, DJ.
Hey, DJ.
How's it going, buddy? Got any questions? It's open QA. While we're talking about speedrunning stuff, shoot us your questions. We'll answer them. Unless you stump us, and then I'm really happy.
Yeah, that'd be great.
No one's done that yet.
For anybody who isn't aware, the term out of bounds applies to when you are outside of the map, whatever the map may be.
Yeah. Anywhere you're not supposed to be, that's out of bounds. Oh, that's not what I wanted. There we go. So we have Mario 1 phasing into roofs, which stops collision check. And you just walk through things. I think they use the exact same thing in Mario 2, and Castlevania uses it, like I said. Mega Man 1 and 2 use that same bug. I think Mega Man is actually getting hit, and I remember there's one at the very end as you're descending Wily's Tower to the boss speedrun, where you actually get hit and phase out the right side of the screen, which causes you to show up on the left side of the screen where there's no map and fall until the end. However, they did put spikes in the out of bounds area, probably for looks, but you can hit them and die out of bounds. So they actually damage phase through those as well. That's dumb. So broken.
The length at which nerds go to beat video games quickly.
Oh, entertaining runs. Now, Pseudo, you haven't gotten to say much. Do you know about how they're actually done? The code side?
It depends game to game.
I know it depends game to game, but let's have some fun. You're the whiz here.
Sure. For TLDR, like, collisions are very hard. And depending on when the games are done, typically you try to detect collision, and the way you do that is, are two objects in the same space or the same position. But that gets really complicated because what you actually see on the screen isn't what actually is happening data-wise. It's like when you see a model, it's not actually the model. You're usually going off of some other set of data that is the collision boxes. And depending on what's going on with that, when you get these edges in the corners of these collision boxes, the actual accuracy of this hit detection can be very fuzzy. Because if you want super accurate hit detection, your game will run very slow because that is very expensive to check all of that. So you kind of make it fuzzy, but if it's fuzzy, then you can kind of do this crazy stuff of like, what if I put myself into corners and hit multiple walls all at the same time? Chances are one of these walls is not going to properly detect the collision, and I'll be able to get through it. Which is what you'll see a lot of the time, especially in games where you can kind of crouch, or if you can move fast. The faster you can move, the more likely you will get through an object. Just because you'll hit a frame where it didn't detect that collision, you only needed it to not detect it once, and then the next time you go to update the frame, you're already on the other side, and then you are going. It can get very, very interesting, especially when you put physics into it, because then you have things like acceleration, and then you want to have things where, if you hit an object at speed, you probably notice this in older games. If you hit an object at speed and you just stop dead, it feels weird because they usually want you to either like slow into it or hit it and kind of bounce off of it a little bit. Or especially in games like racing games, you'll see it very often where the faster you're going, you're probably going to go through some objects, or you'll go through another car, or there's a lot of crazy stuff that can go on. And it really just boils down to it's hard. And even on the most modern games, we still see it because it is still just hard. It is resource intensive. And then for the most part, a lot of gamers have been kind of conditioned to like not do certain things. Like, yeah, don't crouch jump into cracks because that'll usually lead to some funky stuff. But it opens it up for people who want to find glitches to being like, hey, I doubt they put in, a lot of safeguards for this. Let's see what happens. And that's what you still see a lot of like, what if I try to input buffer? Because chances are maybe they're not handling input buffering, whereas you kind of can queue up a lot of inputs by pausing the game and then put yourself right against an edge and then just hope that eventually one of those inputs is missed by the collision detection frame. You get to the other side and then you're just golden, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Well as sorry, I'm gonna say, and then you'll see in a lot of kind of open world games that the kind of more obscure places you'll go, the more likely you'll fall through the map, and that's mostly just because a lot of that collision, a lot of that stuff has to be hand painted. A lot of times they can't just generate it or code it because they have to make sure it works, and then it takes a lot of time. They're like, well, maybe the player isn't going to try to jump over this entire mountain or figure a way to get up here, so we're not going to put collisions, and that's why you'll find in a lot of games, even games like I found it in Halo 4 a few times, you can find some places where, okay, well, the texture isn't rendering here. Chances are they're also not going to detect collisions here. And then sure enough, you stand on it and you'll fall out of the map.
Yes. So the collision being checked on edges is a very common. It does my edge touch another edge. That's one of the easy ways that they used a lot in the early games. And that's why when I was talking about all the early games of, phasing through things, that's what they did. They all of a sudden, I'm a little bit farther than that object, and now it doesn't realize that we're touching each other, so I'm just going to walk through it. That's what Mario 1 is using. The Mega Man 2 and Castlevania are using something entirely different with the screen wrapping. And that's actually memory address errors and fun stuff like that maybe is a little out of scope for this talk, but you can definitely get a lot of interesting information on it. And so Pseudo kind of pushed the out of bounds into the newer era games, where the first one that comes to my mind, because I'm most familiar with that run, is the Sekiro run, where there was actually a point where they pulled the mapping apart and looked at it only with collision on. And if you've ever seen a map with only collision on, so you're only looking at the collision planes and not at the actual textures and stuff, it looks very, very, very different. And while they were looking at it, as Suda was saying, no player's going to get way out there. They noticed that one wall that players probably shouldn't be able to get to didn't have collision on it. It was just a picture of a wall.
The next step is, okay, well, how do we get to that wall?
Turns out Sekiro has a lot of movement and it's pretty easy to get to things. All they ended up doing was taking a good running jump off of a place they weren't really supposed to be but could get to, and then jumped off of a wall with collision to go through the wall without collision. Collision is a mystery to you. Collision is bloody difficult in games. Do you have any specific questions about it?
My favorite thing, though, is you'll notice the most in elevators in games are near impossible to do well and properly. That's why you find a lot of the times you can't jump when you go in an elevator in a game, especially a game with physics. So, we're just going to lock you to this because you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. And for games that, I've had it where I've implemented an elevator, and most of the time when you're in kind of physics engines, you want objects to kind of be in a sleep state because you can't check collisions for every object every time because it's way too resource heavy. But with an elevator, if it's moving, it means that every frame, you're going to have to be detecting its collision and everything on it. And then if you have people jumping and acceleration, and then you have to calculate, what's going on, and then you can get a lot of times in games too, which is another part of out of bounds, and you see in a lot of older games where you can force a lot of collisions very fast, and especially if there's physics, you kind of just get an insane amount of velocity very, very, very quickly, and then that's another way just to kind of eventually you hit a point where the engine can't handle it or just kind of gives up, and you'll just phase right through whatever it is you're infinitely bouncing against.
Which is one of the reasons why I love games that let you jump on elevators, especially because the physics that we use in modern 3D video games is very fuzzy. It's an approximation of what physics actually does. So, and that's in order to save resources. Calculating real physics is very expensive on computer time.
Yeah, it wouldn't work.
So
our games would still be looking like, old school pixel. We wouldn't be able to do most of what we do if we were actually trying to read all real physics on all the objects in the world. You'd still get like five objects on your screen max. AI pathfinding is not. I mean, we can get into that, but yeah, want
good pathfinding, but that's a whole other topic. The reason I love it is because, like I said, physics is an approximation in most modern video games. So when you jump on an elevator, it doesn't behave like it actually would if you jumped on an elevator.
No.
What it does is it takes the frame of where you are and applies a normal jump to you as though you were in a static position rather than a moving position. So you're not doing relative math, you're doing fixed math, because that fixed math is way less complicated. And the fixed math means that you jump and you get your full upward momentum, but the elevator is still going down. So you jump, and this elevator is now like 15 feet below you. And depending on the relative speed and floatiness of the jump, you can actually have it so that the elevator will just go faster than you, and you'll just fall to your death if you jump on this elevator.
I have seen that. That's why you'll see a lot of elevators not be elevators. You'll walk into a little room, it'll play some moving lights to make it look like the room is moving, it will load a different level outside, and you'll get out to a different level. It never actually moved. It's just for that reason.
Load screen.
It is for that reason. Oblivion not being able to start or finish a quest because the NPC fell off a cliff or bridge. Yeah. Actually, I was thinking of Oblivion earlier when we were talking about glitchless runs, and I don't think there's such a thing as a Bethesda glitchless speedrun. I don't think you'd ever get through the game without hitting a glitch.
I think you would have to redefine glitchless.
No intentional glitches.
It's not a glitch, it's a feature. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
That speaks somewhat at length about modern 3D games and their collision. But the older games, the 2D games, we talked a little bit about phasing through objects because of weird state transitions. But another way that you can deal with out of bouncing in old games is via screen wrapping, which DJ brought up just a couple of minutes ago. So in a lot of old video games, there technically isn't a map.
No.
It's just one screen that you're on that has different chunks of a map drawn onto it at different times. So in order to solve the problem of the player being able to run off of that screen, they just have you wrap around to the other side, because there's a fixed number of pixels that are available to draw the player on. So they allocate a certain amount of memory for that. And when you run out of bounds of that memory space, because it's an unsigned integer, it just starts over again.
For the layman's, an unsigned integer means it can only be positive. It cannot have a negative sign. Easiest way to think of it. Wall clipping for boundaries. My favorite wall clipping for boundaries.
Underflow is a whole other thing.
Yeah, my favorite wall clipping for boundaries is still Sekiro, which is also my favorite state machine bug example, where you just fly through, you swim out of the world and then swim through walls that don't actually exist to end up at the boss. It's great. But yeah, the Doom Eternal speedrun definitely uses, and Doom 2016 speedrun uses a lot of there's no collision where there's a roof kind of thing. And then, floating point errors.
One of our favorite errors.
So that's the Doom Eternal, or Doom 2016 speedrun is all floating point errors, where you'll see them jump up on a railing, like a little thin bar that they're standing on now, so it can't calculate their position really well, and they'll just jump a few times and then they'll just fly through the world straight up. That has actually nothing to do with the game or the engine or the bugs. That has everything to do with how computers work with decimal numbers. It's just how processors do decimal math. They're not great at it. It's not accurate. Breath of the Wild speedrun is kind of crazy too, since you can literally go to the final place right at the beginning. Yeah, I could see that. They put so much movement and stuff into that game that you're going to be able to do some dumb things once you know where everything is.
But the to come back to floating points a little bit, because as you know, we love Risk of Rain 2 here. We do.
That game's just one big floating point error.
But it is one big floating point error. And what happens is essentially without costing too much CPU and GPU time, you cannot calculate the level of precision that is required with the decimals involved in the math. So we fuzz things a bit. We go a little bit less precise. And with every little bit of less precision that you need to make these calculations performant, the more jank there is. So if you're moving at a high rate of speed, that is probably not a fixed number. You're probably moving at some fraction, something point something meters per second. And you go up a slope that is not necessarily, easily divisible by that number in order to adjust your speed for the slope. The computer goes, close enough. And then you fly into the sky.
Yeah. And you can totally do this at home. I've done it in my comp classes. I'm sure Pseudo had to do it in his comp classes. I'm sure Rage has done it at some point, where you're converting decimal to binary and back and forth, and you've got some strange decimal number and you try to convert it to binary and it doesn't work. It just doesn't. You can't. It turns into an infinitely repeating number that is just hairs off, so you have to go, it's close enough. It's like 3/1000ths off. It's fine. It's fine.
Except when it isn't.
Yeah. Until that 3/1000ths means you're way up there now. Yeah. That's how it happens. And you can do this in most shooters. If you find like thin bars and stuff and just start jumping on them, you'll usually end up flying through things.
Another thing along with the movement in physics, it's not so much floating point, but you'll find a lot too is people not accounting for Pythagorean theorem.
Oh, it's one of my favorite bugs.
And it still shows up in Halo, and I love it. Whenever you grab a turret, they still allow you to go forward and strafe, which means you can move on a diagonal.
That's not right.
And then you're technically moving faster, and I absolutely love it. Yeah, you'll notice it in physics a lot when you start applying like movement in directions and planes. You're like, well, I want to go up and I want to go left, but if I want to go diagonal, I need to do a bit of both. But if you apply the same speed, you're actually going to be going faster. I won't jump too much into it, but if you try in most games, especially in older ones that they wouldn't allow you to have more than one input at a time, and if you can use some sort of tool or an emulator that allows you to do multiple inputs, you'll find that they won't account for it, and you can just move a lot faster.
One of the most famous ones for this is Doom Original. They did not account for it, and that's what speedrunners do. You'll see them looking 45 degrees and running kind of sideways, because it's taking the sideways velocity and the forward velocity and adding them both together and giving them both to you. If you watched our recent playthroughs of Halo, the newer Halos still don't account for it when you're carrying a turret. So we would pick up turrets and keep up to the party. And actually, I remember passing some people in the party with my turret because it allowed me to abuse Pythagorean and actually run faster while holding a turret than they could run without. So yeah, it's a thing to, keep an eye out for. Even if you're not speedrunning, try hitting them both and see if you can move a little bit faster. It happens more than you think, and still today, often.
And also heavily used in speedrunning of Source Engine games and some of the older Quake Engine games, specifically talking about bunny hopping.
Yes.
So bunny hopping, you abuse the missing Pythagorean calculation in more than one axis. You use the forward and horizontal movement on your 2D plane of the ground, and also the jump velocity, because jumping will generally give you a boost of speed in most games. So you jump as well as move at a diagonal, a 45-degree angle, and that gives you an additional boost, which gets you past the speed limiter for acceleration in older game engines like that, which then you can then crank up to the max. And you see that in bunny hopping. That's what bunny hopping is. So you use that and then combine it with recoil effects of different weapons, like the Gauss cannon in Half-Life 1. Or the gravity gun in Half-Life 2, in order to further boost your movement to the point where you've now moved past the state where the game considers you walking and you're just moving very quickly because of some other reason. And as long as you keep yourself from touching the ground as much as possible, you just keep that velocity.
Yeah, if you jump the frame that you hit the ground, then the game doesn't apply all of its slowdown to your normal walking, and you can just stack speed. That's why. Actually, I was on Steam while going through some of my queues, check out what's being made and what's coming out. They have a bunny hop simulator for teaching bunny hopping.
I wonder if they do ABH.
This is reminding me of how sick the Portal speedruns are to watch.
Oh yeah,
glitchless and unglitchless. Like the glitchless runs are just absolutely fantastic. And then even just like the glitch ones, or ones that are not out of bounds ones, the ones where they allow bunny hopping, and it's just like holy shit! It's just amazing to watch the accuracy that people can just drop these portals at. It's like wow, this is insane.
Yeah. So super accurate and needed.
Portal any percent is what, like 11 minutes?
Something like that, yeah. Because once you can look out the walls, you can shoot portals almost anywhere. And it's just,
I never even thought of that, but that's right.
It's a physics game. It's usually, and it's a short game. You can typically clip into walls and get yourself around places. And with a lot of Source games too, or just games with like gravity physics, you'll find that you'll be able to grab items and then jump and grab them and jump and grab them. And you can abuse the state machine, and you can kind of just infinitely climb in space. And there's I think I did that in Superliminal. There was a glitch I found in Superliminal.
I'm sure there's lots you found in that.
It has an achievement for speedrunning in it, for beating it in under 35 minutes. I've been tempted to get it. I'm not sure if they patch this or not, but the whole premise of that game is it's all about perspective, and like the larger the perspective of the object is when you're holding it, is how large it'll be when it's been placed in the world. And I found that if you jump on it and then jump in the air while grabbing something, it'll of course increase with you as you go in the air. Its perspective stays the same, which means it's getting larger, and you can keep doing that because it'll stay on the floor but just keep getting larger. And the game doesn't calculate collision when you're holding it, but it calculates it when you let go of it. So as long as you're jumping and moving upwards and then let go before you start falling down, as soon as you let go, it'll detect the collision and you'll land on it, and you can keep doing it, and it just keeps getting larger and larger and larger, and you can eventually just reach the ceiling.
That game breeds speedrunners.
Oh yeah.
It knows it too, at least. It tracks it at least.
Yeah, the wall collision checking one way would allow you to break a lot of stuff with the Portal gun. Just shoot it back into the room and jump in it.
Well, and then if we want to get into Portal specifically, there's also portal peaking, which is an advanced technique in Portal, where you peak your collision through the portal just enough to fire another portal. And then you go back through it before that other portal lands. And now you've got an even further portal. Portal peaking is nuts.
Good. I just really enjoy when people play games in ways that the original developers never thought they would be. And like glitchless is always fun, but I also just love the glitch runs of just like the amount of creativity and the amount of cleverness that gets put into this is just absolutely just amazing to watch.
So here's a glitch I saw that even I don't fully understand why it worked yet. And that's the Mortal Shell speedrun of smacking the chained one and just launching.
Yeah, that one's weird.
Even the devs were like, whoa, wait, what?
I think it's because the chained one has the recoil animation from the boss fight loaded. So while he's recoiling, well, the collision box is recoiling, but the textures aren't recoiling. So the collision box moves and you roll into it, and rolling in Souls games is weird. So you roll into that collision box and just get launched into the air.
So it'd be working on the same principle that you see if you've watched the speedrun for that game. When they get to Crucix, there's a big door that you normally have to put down, and the way the roll works is it takes your current direction and just continues it. It doesn't actually check for collision or anything like that. You keep going in that way. So there's a little lift that they use, and then they roll off of that lift to continue on the lift, and they roll right over the wall.
It's really funny.
So
I mean, I love this game. I love Mortal Shell. I think it's fantastic. It's super broken.
I think a quick thing on physics as well that you'll probably find a lot of games for exploiting is there's, depending on how much you can put one object into another one, and depending on the physics engine itself, it will sometimes detect all those collision points as a colliding point and apply the physics to that, as well as there's a lot of games since it happens a lot under the hood that people don't always realize is that it's never frame perfect. Most of the time you are going to go through an object and the physics engine can account for it being like, okay, well, this object is almost halfway through, which just offset it to where it should be and then apply the physics. And sometimes they calculate of like, well, how fast was the object moving? Let's say if you have a wall and it's say like a ball, and let's say the sphere is halfway through the wall, and you're like, well, okay, well, if it was moving this fast, that means, it got through the wall because of this many missed frames, which, calculate based off that where to be putting the ball and how much velocity to put it on the other side, when depending on how incorrect that was in the first place or how that glitch happened, it can incorrectly apply the velocity elsewhere. And that's why you'll find a lot of games where you'll be going kind of slow and you'll hit an edge where all of a sudden you touched like technically 3 or 4 walls and they all apply velocity at you, and you get this multiplied level of velocity, and then you just launch. And Halo was known for this too, for super bouncing. You could jump into cracks, and that's basically kind of what was happening is all of a sudden you would hit a bunch of different walls at once and it would apply all that kind of bounce to you. Typically you're just supposed to bounce a little bit, but if you can hit multiple surfaces, all those surfaces would apply that same force to you. All of a sudden, you just multiplied it by a factor of 4, sometimes even more, and you've just absolutely cannoned yourself to wherever you want to go.
I think we can talk a little bit about the back end of why that's happening too, because it's rather interesting, and it really all relates to the fact that your computer isn't drawing and calculating physics at the same time. It's doing them simultaneously.
It shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, it should not. If your game is well made, that's not what it's doing. Otherwise, your game runs like arse, right? The physics is expensive, and it's running on a set clock, and then your drawing is happening as fast as it can draw to make it nice and smooth, typically. So you're running basically a half step, so you're not always, like, every frame isn't necessarily physics. Physics happens when it happens. Frames happen as fast as they can. Those two not being tied together allows games to happen. It makes games possible. but it also breaks the hell out of them if you know how to use it.
And asynchronous programming is really hard.
You'll see a lot of even modern games will just still frame lock. You'll hear it. I believe a lot of the Souls games frame lock because it's just trying to do physics calculations outside of a frame locked game is just, it is hard because when a game is not frame locked, you have to, especially with those games where physics is also based off, animation, and it's super tied to, the collision and animation and making sure those things are frame perfect. It gets so difficult, and it's a little bit easier in other games that don't have, like, if it's a first person game or if it's a lot of games that doesn't have, like, you don't need model perfect collision, you can kind of have like approximations, then that way it's a lot easier to not have to lock it to these model specific collisions. You can still kind of have that, or here's a box I put around, and if it's in that box it's a collision, we'll just deal with it that way, rather than having like these super small polygons, a lot of different spots to take. Because what people tend to forget is that in these 3D spaces, it's technically the vertices that you're going to be calculating, and if you look at an object, there's a whole lot of points in an object that make up that object, and you kind of, how accurate you're going to be is how tight and how small those points are going to be, as well as it can't just be the edge, because you're not going to be guaranteed that you're going to be checking when the two edges are touching. And this is what happens when you'll notice in some platforming games that if you can fall through the level, it's usually because they only really detect the bottom couple pixels for detection, or they'll have a raycast shoot out of the bottom of the player. Well, if you can get the point of that raycast that's shooting out below the object that you're touching, it's no longer going to ever detect the collision, and you'll just kind of fall through it. And it's hard, and we can calculate it truly, but it's just so many points of data that this is what 3D simulators do, and you see how long it takes to just compile that stuff. It takes days to weeks to months, not nanoseconds to milliseconds.
Yeah, we're trying to do this in real time.
And that's precisely why you see things like supercomputers that are built to model. Let's use folding at home as an example. Yep. You're modeling how drugs interact with different proteins. And doing that accurately is extremely hard.
Yeah, very, very costly. Very, very costly. This is also the same reason why, if you watched our Risk of Rain 2 runs, when we get way too much stuff happening on the screen and we manage to actually make the game lag and slow down even on our ridiculously overpowered computers for that game, we fall through the world. It can't calculate the floor's physics and collision in time to draw the next frame when it needs to, and it's just, well, there's probably not a floor there. Bye.
And sometimes it's right. Sometimes.
Usually when that happens, that's usually when it's the because like when you're detecting collision, it's usually just the bottom. You don't want to have that too much of a distance, because that's a lot of stuff you have to be calculating. So you don't have to miss it by a lot. You just have to miss it by just enough that whatever it is that's collecting collision at the bottom is below that collider. Then you're good. It'll never hit it again, and you're just going to keep on falling. Or in some other games where if it's got like weapon collision or something that you're holding, you'll find that you'll just get stuck on the floor.
I love those.
Ragdoll games, you'll find that, like, you used to find this a lot in like Gary's Mod kind of games, where you could get a ragdoll halfway through something because you'll miss that frame collision detection, and it'll move as much as it can, and then it kicks back in, and all of a sudden it can't move left or right because it's going to hit the wall on each side, and now it's just stuck in the wall. And then sometimes it'll still be applying physics and velocity because it's moving and shaking, and everything just goes to hell. And you'll notice you're dropped to like 2 frames, and everything, all you hear is all these colliding sounds and all this kind of effects start applying, and you're like, oh no, oh no, oh no. And then eventually it usually ends up in a crash, as we start getting those floating point errors, as we start getting to those velocities that are too high to calculate.
Yup. And most people at that point think, oh, my sound is bugged. But your sound isn't bugged. It's just loading the collision sound a lot. You're actually colliding just far too much.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why when I typically get stuck inside a brass hole as a mercenary in Risk of Rain, it just goes brrr, and I actually have to take my headphones off. Like they have to come off my head.
Yeah, I think
very silly.
One of the most famous ones for out of bounds for speedrunning, I think, is the staircase in Mario 64. I can't remember if this is something you can do non-tasks.
It is.
It's basically the part of you can do that like backwards jump and then spam jump as you land, and you can shoot up the stairs. And there's a part of it where to get to the boss at the top, you need to, I think you have to hit a star count. There's some sort of criteria you need. Otherwise, it's an infinite staircase. And there's a part where if you hit it, the game detects, okay, at this point, put the player back at the bottom or put them back somewhere mid up the stairs. But it seems like it's infinite. But all it's doing is kind of just teleporting you back. But if you can get through that point fast enough, you can phase right through that detection boundary and get to the other side without meeting the criteria. And it is just amazing to watch. It also just sounds hilarious listening to Mario jump that much in a short amount of time.
It's very good.
I wanted to actually address that one on stream because it's a good question. Do you think it's fair to have emulators be rated the same as non-emulators? And Rage is 100% correct. Entirely depends on the emulator. There are emulators whose entire goal is to be as accurate as possible. There are TAS emulators, which are required for the TAS runs. And then I'm sure there's actual categories where you need real hardware. But then a lot of emulators are just as accurate as needed. And that's why you see so much emulation error happen on them. If you're seeing emulation errors, it's probably not a good emulator to try to speedrun with.
Yeah.
Sometimes then too, emulators can be nice because it's a bit more of a controlled environment. There's kind of like pros and cons to it, and it depends on certain things too. Where it's really prevalent in the arcade cabinet era of high scores and sometimes speedrunning, because emulation can kind of put you in a perfect scenario. Well, sometimes in hardware, there's actually a lot of flaws, especially in older hardware that kind of can be exploited, maybe not even intentionally. As well as just on how things are rendered. I think it's kind of one of those questions that it really kind of depends on what it is, and the emulator that's being used and the quality of it. But it kind of also boils down to what the group of people who are organizing it agree on, and the kind of standards that they want to set for it.
Yeah, so not all emulators are equal, and not all speedrun categories are the same. Basically, RNG sucks in speedruns. Yes, but RNG can be manipulated. Entropy is a thing.
There's no such thing as true random.
Yep.
Or what we found.
There's just fake random is what we use. And so in a lot of like the old games, what they're doing is they're looking at how long the game's been on, what buttons have been
how many
pressed.
Steps you've taken.
Yeah. So the routes you take will change the RNG. So that's why when you watch old JRPG speedruns and stuff like that, they'll fiddle with the controller before the run starts. They're creating entropy in a planned way that they know how it will be processed by the game to set up the first bits of their randomness for them. So they know what to expect. It's not truly random. Then the path that they take is going to change the random as well. So they can actually create really consistent runs by peeling apart the actual game and looking at how it handled random and how they can manipulate it. You just want to speed up your Pokemon game. Speedrunning.
Well, I mean, Pokemon Blue is coming up at GDQ. You may want to watch that.
So, we can dive into a bit of the RNG manipulation because it's kind of a cool topic and applies to. There's some on the top of my head.
I would like to reserve a little bit of time towards the end to talk about glitchless speedrunning as well.
I just added in state machines are also hard. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but you've seen us break states all the time, and just getting your character into a state that the game doesn't think it should be in controls what you can do and where you can go and what you can use. And the most famous one of this as of late is the Sekiro air swimming, where you go into the water and it's a separate area of the game to be underwater. You have to use a specific button and phase transition, and everything changes for your controls. Well, when you go out of bounds while underwater and swim up past the trigger point to tell it it's in the air, it thinks you're still swimming, so it lets you swim. And it turns out it's not like checking for water and all that stuff. It's just, while you're in this area, these controls do this. So as soon as you get out of the water, those controls apply in the air. And that's why they can just swim through the air and get to wherever they need. And all they need to go is go to the closest bit of water to the boss that they're trying to find. And then they can exit the water normally. And lo and behold, the state machine goes, oh, okay, we're walking now. Okay. And they're there. That's state machine bugs. There's 1,000,001 of them. If you have specific questions on them, hit us and we'll address it. You wanted to say something, Suda.
You were about to say something.
Yeah, we're going to talk about random numbers. So yeah, it's kind of crazy because we kind of take it for granted, but there isn't really anything as random. Random is just kind of in the context of humans at least, it's when we don't have enough information to really be able to predict the outcome. But yeah. As far as we know, until you get to the crazy quantum level, we are kind of constrained by cause and effect. And for something to happen, there has to be a cause, and then there's going to be an effect. And that is, at some level, it can be calculated, it can be planned, it can be recreated. There's nothing as just randomly happen, unpredictable. And like a good example is a coin flip. To humans, we can't predict what a coin flip is, but given the right circumstances, they're technically speaking, if you had all the information, all the data, the weight of the coin, all the physics information you need, the pressure applied to the flip and stuff, you can calculate what it's going to land on. And this is what happens in simulators, because we have to simulate what's going to happen. And technically speaking, we know the answer before we display it. When you start getting into games and we start talking about RNG, which is random number generator, we usually, to use random values, will generate a number, and depending on the percentage of how often we want that to happen, we'll take how many times can this number be either divided into it, or how many times this number will show up and compare that range. But for that number to get generated, we need some way to what was called seeding it. And a common factor for a long time was using time. But then all of a sudden, once everyone knows what it's doing, you can kind of start reproducing it, and it becomes a lot more predictable and it starts getting a lot more crazier. And you'll find that games nowadays that try to get to true random do a lot of crazy stuff. They'll go off, hardware specs, they'll go off time, they'll go off mouse movements, they'll go off a whole lot of stuff to try to get as much unpredictable behavior as possible to kind of see this information, because it really is hard to get random. And you'll notice this when you start programming, because you'll call random by default, and if you don't seed it, you'll run your program and you're like, oh, it's random, and then you run it again and the same thing happens, you run it again, the same thing happens, and you run it again and the same thing happens, because if you give it the same input, you're going to get out the same output, because it's not actually random. The first time it's random because we don't know the output, but once you know the input and the output, that's it. And depending on a lot of these older games, we don't have the luxury of taking all this information, so you can kind of figure out they're basing it off player position or items in inventory or health. And then once you know what they're using to generate this so-called pseudo-random outcome, you can manipulate it in your favor, being like, well, I know if I set up this information and then do it, I can actually give the input for my desired output.
Yes. I had something for that and I completely lost it. So.
And I think a lot of people now, they try to base it off like cosmic radiation. We haven't found any mappable pattern for that, I believe. So we'll try to.
It does require network calls, though, so not always applicable.
Yeah, I plucked where I was going out of the sky, and I have remembered it. I saw this a lot playing old MMOs. It's very, very, very obvious that in the old MMO, they are basing it on current time. Because you'll get a super rare world drop. It's not likely to drop. And then you'll see 10 of them appear on the auction house at the same time. Everybody got this at the same time. And then you won't see another one for weeks. And if there's that many people constantly killing things, you should expect a more even distribution of these items dropping. But they tend to drop all around the same cluster of time. And then just wait and get a cluster of drops. It's actually my advice for you in MMOs. If you get a really rare drop, wait a week to sell it. You'll get way more money for it. You won't be fighting with everyone else.
So yeah, RNG isn't.
Does not exist. We made it up. It's kind of scary. It's kind of crazy to think about too. Just how like we kind of take it for granted, and it doesn't always click for a lot of people. Humans, just in general, we're not really great at handling probability, and the fact that there isn't really, there always is, like, the outcome that was going to happen is going to happen, basically, regardless of what we try to do to manipulate it without directly influencing it. We just feel like we have intuition over odds when really we don't.
Yeah, humans really do not understand probability. And it depends how you ask a question as well. One of my favorite stats 101 questions is, if I flip a coin 4 times and they all come up heads, what are the odds that the next coin flip is going to be heads? It's 50-50.
Yep.
The other coin flips don't matter.
Nope.
But if you ask the question, what is the probability of me flipping heads 5 times in a row? Super tiny.
Yep. A very, very famous probability game show as well was the one where they have 3 doors and they let you choose a door and then they say, do you want to change that door? And choose one of the other 2. Now, you would think that changing or staying would be the same odds. Sounds like it is. You're just choosing one of 3, but it's actually not. It works out to a 66% chance if you change.
This is the Monty Hall problem.
Yes,
it's called.
Yes, that's the name of it. The math is very, very, very interesting. I've seen it played out in experimentation. It's very, very strange. But think of it this way. If you've chosen the right door and you change, you're now wrong. But if you've chosen the wrong door and change, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting the right door. The odds of having chosen the right door first are less than 50%. It actually works out being beneficial to change every time.
Yeah, it basically boils down to inversing the original probability, because you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting it wrong, and by opening a door, they collapse that. And by switching, you basically, you're basically gambling, because it's a 33% chance to get it right, and a 66% chance to get it wrong. And by switching, you're basically opting into that 66 chance of I chose wrong rather than I chose right.
And probabilistically, you probably did choose wrong.
But it's, the Monty Hall it trips a lot of people up. But yeah, it's cool. Humans suck at probability, and unfortunately, it gets exploited all the time. And this is why we saw loot crates become so big.
Yes.
You fall into the gambler's fallacy of, well, eventually I have to get lucky, and it's like, well, probability doesn't care how many times you have been technically unlucky. It's not going to just give it to you. Unfortunately, same thing with speedrunning too. You'll find if a lot of people try to go through kind of an RNG route of, I can get this drop, and maybe it's like a 1 in 100 chime. Okay, well, just because you've done it 99 times, it's not going to guarantee it for this time. You can still go another whole bunch of times. Over time, you'll average out to those odds, but there's nothing out there that's calculating, being like, okay, this is 99th for sure. It'll be this time. And that's why, especially when you start playing games and you do true probability or try to calculate it that much, you'll find that people always feel like it's against them. RNG in most games has to be heavily weighted in the player's favor, because if it's anything true to them, that it'll always feel like it's actually going against you.
Yeah. If you go try to do it true random, everybody will just call you XCOM.
Yeah. Because that's literally what they did.
Yeah,
they implemented true randomness.
That's why people hate XCOM, is because it's actually random. Check out BBC Horizon, How You Really Make Decisions. I don't want to go too much on this because we have other topics we want to get into, but very, very, very cool documentary that actually walks you through all the experimentation, and they take it out onto the street and do the experimentation to random people to show you how people make you make decisions, how marketing makes your mind go where they want it to go. And even if you know about it, it can happen to you. It's that powerful in the brain.
You have to be very, very, what's the word? on guard for that sort of manipulation. You have to be aware of it. You have to be watching for it in order to make sure that you're not just falling prey to mind manipulation. And it's not mind control. It's just changing the way you think about things.
Convincing you to think what they want you to think. It's really convincing you that their option is the safest option, because brains like to be safe. So it's all about how it's worded. But routing. Rage wanted to go into some routing stuff.
Yeah, we had quite a bit of discussion now, quite a bit of very fun discussion about bugging video games and glitching video games. Super fun to talk about. Love it. But there's people like Deus and I that don't particularly like actually doing that in video games. We enjoy being as good as possible at the video game to be able to beat the video game very quickly. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that. There are a couple of different things, like, knowing how to build your character, for instance, knowing how to route items in a game, knowing how to route out your movement paths.
And absolutely watch our JRPG How to Build video. Or not, but any RPG builds. How to do an RPG build. We did a whole panel on it. Watch that. It'll help you go faster in itself.
Yeah, and what that video boils down to, if you want a TLDW version, Too Long Didn't Watch, is go hard on your strengths and avoid your weaknesses. So, in order to, say, beat a boss quickly, what's your goal? Your goal is to set that boss's health to 0. So how do we accomplish that? Well, sometimes you have, items that you can use that will deal damage directly to an enemy, and usually they'll do a large amount of damage because they are a restricted resource. So that's a good way to do damage. Okay, well, what else can you do to deal some more damage? Well, you can up your damage as much as possible. So that's why you see people like Val, for instance, when you do a build in a game like Neo 2, for instance, you go all in on whatever you're choosing to deal damage. Could be, like in Dark Souls, it could be a caster build. So you go all in on intelligence in order to do maximum damage. And you can see this in Dark Souls Crapple Mage speed runs, where once you get Dark Bead, you literally one-shot every other boss in the game.
Dark Bead breaks that game so hard. The first time I saw the Neo fight with Dark Bead, I was just like, oh, this is good. What? It was literally that fast. Like, oh, this is going to be it's over.
Yeah. So you want to optimize your build for however you're going to be dealing damage or accomplishing your goal. You want to, beat the game quickly. So you need a lot of movement. You need a lot of damage. And everything else just kind of doesn't really matter. Anything else anybody wants to say about building? Because otherwise I think we're ready to talk a little bit about routing items and otherwise.
You do sometimes need defenses in your builds, but you want to know exactly how much you need to survive, and you don't want a hair more than that. Every point more than what you need to survive is a waste. All of it should be going to your damage after that. But of course, dying loses time, so usually.
Very dependent too, because I think a trap that a lot of people kind of fall into is they try to apply a formula, and that doesn't always work with speedrunning. We'll find that things can kind of get kind of stuck in a rut. You'll find there's a period where not a lot of progress is made on the times, and these records last forever, and then someone will start fresh, and all of a sudden, hey, what if I try this strat or try something new, and all of a sudden they found a way to cut a whole lot of time off. So it's always important to not always try to buckle down on a strat that's been working for a while. Sometimes it is kind of good to maybe I'll just go with no prior biases and just try something fresh or try something and just see what happens. Because I believe happens quite a bit in a lot of the Dark Souls speedruns, because a lot of people kind of find a fast run and they just focus on trying to improve that. And then it'll go years until someone says, well, what if we just try, this completely different approach or this completely different build, and find out that, actually through a different route entirely, especially in games that don't have an exact linear path, all of a sudden it's like, well, we didn't actually try or plan this route out. Turns out this was here the whole time.
Yeah. And that's again where the community comes in, like we were talking about earlier.
For sure. That's exactly this transition happened in Dark Souls 1, where for a long time, what was considered to be the fastest way to beat the game was with the Black Knight Halberd. And don't get me wrong, the Black Knight Halberd is an excellent weapon.
That weapon trivialized my first run.
Oh yeah, completely. But it's one, an RNG drop, so it's very reset heavy very early into the run. And two, it doesn't deal as much damage as magic, as it turns out. Because again, we're talking about a limited resource. You only have so much resource that you can use to do magic. And this is true in every Souls game. So because it is a limited resource, the payoff of using that limited resource is generally higher. So now we've got this, the approach switches over to using mostly magic in the speedruns because, limited resource, higher damage, which allows you to kill bosses faster, which is the goal of Dark Souls. And that sort of leads us into routing. With the example of again, Dark Souls, the Black Knight Halberd versus the... I wouldn't even say not last, but the different routes that you can take actually do take different times. And this is everything from, being able to walk from one area to another faster, or being able to death warp back instead. Like, that saves you seconds to minutes right there. Say walking from Sen's Fortress to, and this isn't even death warping, this is just warping, but walking from Sen's Fortress to the ONS fight takes a long time. It's a lot of walking. But after you've beaten ONS, you get the ability to warp between bonfires, and suddenly you just don't need to do nearly as much walking. It saves a ton of time. So you apply that same process, but with the checkpoints in the game. So you'll sit at a very specific bonfire, run out, grab a bunch of items, fight a boss, and then instead of sitting at the next checkpoint, because there's not actually anything you need there, you just die and get warped back to the previous checkpoint. Yes, or homeward button.
Yeah, you see the same thing done in to an even greater extreme in Mortal Shell, as one that is being speedrun very, very regularly right now. A lot of people have seen it. It has the same checkpoint system, and you're always starting from the middle and going out one of these paths. So they just stay rested at the first point, run and beat the boss without ever stopping at any checkpoints, and then when the boss dies, they just teleport right back to the very start. And it actually turns out, the way Mortal Shell is designed, the hardest part of the level is after you beat the boss getting out. But that's the hardest part of the game. So they actually skip the entire hardest part of the game by just teleporting out of the area back to wherever they used to be. The parallels of speedruns and no-hit runs are kind of amusing. Both challenge types basically try to avoid as much of the game as possible. Yeah.
Depending on the category.
Yeah.
But yes. And another thing with routing, and this, because routing isn't just movement, it's also, what sort of build you're taking, what items you're going to be near, what you need to pick up. You'll also have things to consider, like, okay, well, if I need to do, X amount of damage to an enemy to kill it, what's the way that, without going out of my way, that I can deal that amount of damage to that enemy?
Or the least out of my way.
Yeah, or the least out of my way. So you'll see that in again, Dark Souls speedruns, because this is one of the things that I'm most familiar with. You'll see that they will sit on souls for a long period of time. They'll get up to 50,000 souls without spending them. And it's because it's actually faster to not level up and take a couple extra swings to kill certain enemies than it is to level up.
Yeah, that's the time of talking to the person, entering the screen, doing a level. Well, it turns out if you take all that time to get into the level up screen, doing up multiple levels is way faster than doing that intro bit multiple. Actually, an interesting point on that speed up tip is in Bloodborne, that's why they killed the doll every time. Because when you kill her, she doesn't talk and it just jumps right into the level up screen and it skips all that animation. Part of the routing.
There's actually a point. There was a point in the routing initially where you didn't kill the doll up until a certain point, and then once you dealt a certain amount of damage, then you would start killing the doll. But it turns out it's actually just faster to always kill the doll.
That's sad. That's why I can't I can't speedrun Bloodborne, because I can't bring myself to kill the doll.
Poor doll.
Is there a no doll speedrun category of Bloodborne? Maybe we should start one.
Yeah, no doll percent.
The big thing with routing is practice. 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 And then practice some more. Run that route over and over and over and over until you can do it almost blindfolded. I thought they just killed the doll because they knew Gehrman used her first. Lewd. Not even gonna touch that one, because Gehrman touched it first.
Anyway. And in some cases, you literally practice until you can do it blindfolded because the tricks are that consistent. Like, for instance, the Super Mario 64 blindfolded speedrun that we saw at GDQ and referenced earlier, literally blindfolded. You practice the tricks until they're in your hands, rather than having to, look at the screen, think about where you're going. You just do it.
We're still talking routing. I'm just setting that one up next. That'll take us home into the
sure
the free game images.
So another thing about routing. Another thing about routing is you want to think about if it is possible, the order in which you clear checkpoints for a nice wording for it. The checkpoints in a game, again, like Dark Souls, is the boss fights. So you have a couple of options at the beginning of the game and in the later game too, as to how you approach things, and it depends on what your build is. For instance, if you're doing a BKH run, an old school speed run, you will generally go for the gargoyles first, because you need to get enough souls that you can actually wield the BKH properly. So you get that 10,000 souls, which is just enough to level up to use the BKH. But if you're going for a magic route, you actually don't need those souls. So you can go kill some other bosses first to get a larger amount of souls so that you can just boost your damage hugely right out the gate. So it's all about figuring out how to prioritize different checkpoints in the game in order to make yourself as strong as possible, as quickly as possible.
Now, there's a bunch of people that are watching that are going, these are so many variables. How am I ever going to get started with speed? This is too much to deal with. How can I possibly begin? There's so many variables and so much testing. And the easiest way to say this is with the community. You know what? There's already a pre-established bar for what's fastest. Is that the absolute fastest possible in the world? Probably not. But it's the fastest we've found, and like the scientific method, master the bar before you try to break the bar. Get to where the community is.
Break it really hard.
Yeah. But get to where the community is. Figure out what they've figured out for routing. And you know what? If you jump into any one of the speedrunning Discord communities and say, hey guys, I'm kind of interested in speedrunning this, you're going to have a slew of people just jump out and go, hey, here, this is how you get started. This is what you need to know. Here's the reading material. Here's all the information that we've gathered. Welcome to the community. They're super friendly people usually. And then you just read and you start practicing exactly what they've done. And once you've got that down, then you can try something new. Then you will know enough to be like, I think this might be faster. And try it. And if it is, cool, share it. If not, keep trying. It's just a big trial and error system from there. The hardest part is finding that information to get started. And that's just the community. Just rely on your community. So, tricks for practicing. Tricks for practicing tricks.
So this one, I think the most important thing is to have a state that you can put yourself into where you can easily practice that trick. And like Deus is writing, the save states in an emulator are fantastic for this. It'll allow you to load up the game and be exactly where you need to be in order to start practicing your trick. Like, for instance, Lobos Jr., one of my favorite streamers, has a Super Nintendo Mini, and that allows for save states. So he's got a save state that's right before the Iceless Heart skip in Mega Man X. And every time he fires up the Super Nintendo, he practices that skip. That's a great way to get practice for any little trick that you're trying to do. Another way to achieve essentially the same thing is to back up save files for certain games.
Yes, now we're into the PC games where, you're thinking, well, like Dark Souls, Sekiro, stuff like this. How can I just practice this boss over and over and over and over again to get to speedrun? Well, saves are still a file on your computer. At the end of the day, all of that information, like if you're right before the boss and you just exit out of the game and quit, and you come back into the game, you're right there. You kill the boss, you're past it, you can't go back, but that is a file on your computer. So what people do is they will take that file, the save file, and every game is different, but a quick little Google search will tell you exactly where it saves itself. You name that file whatever it needs to be named, you put it in another location. Now at any time you need, you can rename that file and put it back into the game and start the game. You're back there. If you haven't deleted it and you've just copied it, you can do it over and over and over, and it's essentially a save state for computer. They're really no different.
And this can be applied to consoles as well. Any console that has a cloud backup for your save files, it doesn't update every single time it saves. It updates every once in a while or when you tell it to. So you can play the game, get to the point you want to practice it, and then re-download the cloud saves, or get to the point where you want to practice, upload your cloud saves, practice it, re-download the cloud saves, and then you have a save state right before the thing that you want to practice again.
Yep. And then on the hacked console side, which they're literally just accessing the hard drive, they do the exact same thing the PC does. That's how Bloodborne speedrunners do it. They have a hacked console, and they just copy the save off of the thing, rename it to, The reason I say rename is because when you move that save off, it's going to be 9A5B3C4D dot some extension that you've never heard of. And then it's going to be totally unintelligible. So you grab that and you name it Shadows of Yharnam, any percent. And that's the state you should be at every time you reach that point of the run. So you can just go, okay, I need to practice this boss. This boss is what's been killing me. It's already set up so you're the same level, the same weapons, the same whatever you want to have set up, and you can have a nice consistent experience with this boss. You know, it's not the same practice if you do a casual playthrough and get there, because you're stronger, you have more items, you have different items. It's a different experience. You really need to have that super finite, exactly the state that you were in during your run. It's very important, because fights change. Fights change a great deal based on how strong you are.
And the essence of what we're doing here is trying to give you a way that you can repeatably and deterministically approach the same problem in the same way over and over again in order to get really, really good at it. Because that's the essence of practice.
Yeah.
You want to do the same thing in the same way so that you can do it without error on demand.
And let's be honest here. The crux of speedrunning, the number one thing for speedrunning is doing it as many times as humanly possible, over and over and over and over again. And I hear that misconception from a lot of people with speedrunners. They see them playing the speedrun and they're like, well, can they play the game normally? Yes. Yes, they can. And have probably more times than you have ever dreamed of doing it. Like thousands of playthroughs to know every nook and cranny and crevice and glitch and missing wall and name it. They've done the game inside out, backwards, in every way possible, for the most part.
Although it is also totally possible that you just like forget how to do it casually, and that's happened to me with a couple of games.
You can forget how to do it casually, but if you go back to play it casually, you'll be able to play it fine. I've heard the Happy Hob say how he doesn't even know how to play Soulsborne games normally anymore because he's been no-hitting so long. Yeah, totally. Totally a thing that can happen. And it's not about him not having done it before, not being able to do it, just not having done it in so long. So long. You know what else we haven't done in a long time?
Giving away video games.
Aw, yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I like giving away free stuff.
It feels nice.
Did I just screw this up somewhere? I did. There. Bam. Okay. Fixed. All right. I'm almost done. I swear. I'm almost done. So last call for alcohol? No, for questions. You can have alcohol all night. Questions, last call. Does anybody have anything they would like to know about speedruns? Something you've seen that bent your brain and just... how did they do that? Why is that even possible in the code? What kind of hacky, half-ass shenanigans are going on in this game to allow them to do that BS?
It says every Soulsborne runner.
Excuse me. I asked for a refreshed list, not an empty list. Thank you. Please? Please?
How do people jump through walls? So we did talk a little bit earlier about collision and how collision is very, very difficult. So there's a couple of different ways that this can happen. In 2D games, it's generally because there will only be collision on a certain part of the sprite. So you will be able to, move too fast or bounce off a wall or do something strange that causes the game to miss that collision check. And once you pass through the edge, it doesn't check anymore. It only checks while the edges are close. So if the edges aren't close, it doesn't check. It doesn't care. So you just pass right on through.
In the context of the newer games, a lot of what that going through walls is that the wall is drawn visually to give the player a nice experience, but on the collision planes, which is what the game itself runs on. So there's two things happening. There's the collision world where the game is happening, and then there's the visual world where it looks all pretty and that's what you're playing. And they don't look the same. They're not the same thing. They're overlaid on top of each other to look the same. But a lot of times that wall, to you that looks like a wall, is actually just air to the game. And the developers just said they won't be able to get there. There's no point in putting a wall there because when you have more collision, that's more calculation for the computer to do. So you just run faster and we won't put a wall there. Really interesting. We can kind of talk a little bit about, I just want to bash on Heavenly Sword for a quick minute for putting collision on all sorts of things that absolutely didn't need collision in the game and giving me 5 FPS. That's why we had such crap frame when I played that game, because they tried to put collision on everything even though you could never collide with it anyway. So why calculate it?
Yeah, it's all about optimizing, and then there's games that optimize too much, and then all of a sudden things that probably should have been calculated get missed, and it's a hard thing to balance. To talk about what Board's saying about Skyrim and the bucket, from my understanding, what you can do with that is there's it's kind of like an exploit in the physics part of when you're actually holding an object and it no longer really has physical properties. It's kind of just a static thing in the world. So when you hit the wall, you push off the wall, but then you push off the bucket, then you push off the wall. Eventually you're going to go through something, and it's most likely just going to be the wall because the bucket isn't moving. And you can kind of use that because every time you calculate it, it slowly pushes you further and further into a wall, and eventually you'll hit that point of no more detection, and then you'll just phase through the wall.
And sort of the same deal with prop flying in other games, where and this is something we spoke about earlier. The thing that you pick up is no longer considered a full physics object while you're holding it. So it just has a position in the world as you're manipulating it. You're checking it out, and then you use the fact that it is a physics object while you're not holding it, so you can like hold it, drop it, it does physics, it falls to the ground, but you can jump on top of it and grab it again, and now it's no longer a physics object while it's in midair and you're standing on it. Yeah. So you just keep doing that over and over, and you can fly wherever you want via bucket or chair.
So basically, the bucket is the most powerful thing in Skyrim universe, is what we're saying. You can not only use it to fly and phase through walls, but you can also use it to steal everything in a shop.
The prop flying is something that's very, very often seen in Source Engine games as well. Half-Life 2, for instance, uses quite a bit of prop flying to get into areas where you normally wouldn't be able to get, so there's just no collision stopping you from getting there, and then abusing that to out of bounds their way through a level. Also, go watch Half-Life 2 speedruns. They're dope.
Just love any speedrun with bunny hopping. It's just, I don't know, bunny hopping at like a professional level is just very satisfying to watch.
I fixed it.
Yay.
So it turns out in the middle of streaming, it invalidated my token. So it worked at the beginning of the stream, and then when I refreshed it at the end of the stream, it didn't work.